Hello, my name is Kevin Howard, and I'm the host of the podcast Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. In episode 6 that I posted last week, I talked about why it's really important for us to have important conversations now. And what I mentioned is because all our problems had gotten so big that the only way we could solve these problems now is if we all came together and cooperated, figured it out, and got it done. Because if we don't, the next stage is going to be catastrophic for all of us. So we got to deal with these problems now. And last week, I talked about the vitriolic divide that has poisoned our social discourse to the point where our functioning democracy is not even working. This week, I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room. Yeah, here we go. I'm going to talk about the climate crisis. Now, before you get worried that I'm going to geek this thing out with all types of science and technology and this and that and the other, the whole point of this conversation is to put it in a narrative that actually relates to your life and why it's important. It should be important to you, why it's certainly important to me, right? And yes, I will use a few metrics, but I'm not going to get deep into the woods. So I just wanted to give you that caveat before we started. Now, the climate crisis is kind of a dual crisis because we have what's happening with the changes in climate that we are causing. Let's get that straight. And we have a natural resource overshoot. The fact that we consume more natural resources in a year than the earth has the capacity to produce in a year. And that is a problem. Okay. So these are dual problems, both of which we need to figure out, or it's going to be hell to pay for future generations. Okay. So here we go. As with all planetary phenomena, these things typically take thousands of years to change. Okay. So this story of climate change is going to start over 15,000 years ago. Yeah, don't worry. Don't come back. It's okay. Because we're not going to take 15,000 years to finish the story. But it starts over 15,000 years ago during the Ice Age. Now, the thing that made the Ice Age was that you had such erratic, extreme weather events, extreme cold, extreme heat. I mean, the most catastrophic tornadoes, hurricanes, blizzards, you name it, right? Okay. And so here I'm going to introduce the first metric. It's called global average surface temperature. Okay. And it really is what it sounds like. Just imagine taking the temperature around the earth and getting the average temperature. That average temperature reflects the hottest parts on the planet, usually near the equator, and the coldest parts of the planet, usually near the poles. Okay, right. And everything in between, the global average surface temperature. So during the Ice Age, the global average surface temperature was whipping up and down in a 10-year period. It could go up 10 degrees and then down 5 degrees. And again, that average surface temperature reflects 120 degrees in a modern context, 120 degrees in the Saudi desert, right? And minus 70 degrees in Siberia somewhere. Okay. So when that average temperature goes up 10 degrees, that 120 now is maybe 200 degrees. And that minus 70 degrees in Siberia, maybe minus 150 degrees. You see what I'm saying? So major changes in that global average surface temperature produces extreme temperatures around the globe. Now, the next thing you need to understand about that is there is a direct correlation between the local temperature and the amount of moisture, the kind of weather that occurs. So the more erratic the temperatures are, the more severe the weather is. That's just a correlation, but we can follow that. We've probably seen it in our lives, and we'll get to that. Okay. So you had the ice age, and this global average surface temperature popping up and down in 10 years here and 20 years there and 100 years there, you know, produced such severe weather conditions that civilization of any significance was not possible. We have done our, our archaeologists and our scientists that look to antiquity have done all types of research to try to ascertain to what extent civilization existed during the ice age, and there's not a lot of evidence because the weather was just not conducive for it. Okay, so 15,000 years ago, the ice age started, well, the ice age ended. And the reason why it ended is the global average surface temperature, the erratic up and down, actually started to moderate, you know. So maybe 5 degrees up and 3 degrees down, but not 10 degrees up and 10 and 12 degrees down, right? Okay. So it started to moderate. And this period of moderation was like 5,000 years. Again, when it comes to planetary changes in our ecology, it usually takes thousands of years. So the period of moderation from the ice age, call it the thawing from the ice age, was like 5,000 years. But after that 5,000 years where the global average surface temperature was actually compressing, the peaks and valleys were getting closer and closer and closer, we entered the sweet spot. That's called the Holocene. The Holocene. Okay. And it's a period of stability where the global average surface temperature, let me get it right. The global average surface temperature of the planet hit 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, I'm not going to talk in Celsius because we Americans do deal with Fahrenheit. Okay, so 57 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I'm rounding so that for the simplicity of our conversation. We don't need to hear about 1.8 degrees. Okay. So 57 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take 2 degrees. That's a tight little band compared to the madness of the Ice Age. Okay. And so for the next 10,000 years, the global average surface temperature stayed within at 57 degrees, give or take 2 degrees up or 2 degrees down. That was it. And what that did was produce consistent and predictable weather around the globe. Now, again, as I told you, that 57 degrees accommodated 120 degrees in the hottest of places and minus 80 degrees, in the coldest of places, right? But they were consistent, more consistent, and the weather was more consistent because that average surface temperature was consistent. Okay. So this is the Holocene. And within this period of time, the weather became favorable for human life, favorable for us to get to have hunter-gathering communities, our antiquity of modern civilization, right? And to take notice because there were consistency in the weather, that the weather became predictable. And this is how hunter-gatherer communities first innovated farming. Right. Okay. Now, farming was a boon, as you will find out. Why? Because for the first time, communities were able to produce excess food. Then the hunter-gatherer communities who basically hunted to get what they were going to eat, and that was it, not much more. Now, through farming, we were able to produce excess food than the people who needed to eat. And what that did was support rapid population growth. It also supported the first signs of trade. If we have surplus, if we have more, we can trade with the next tribe over there who need some food, but they have some great clothes. Nothing wrong with that. Okay. And that led to the first bit of trade, which led to commerce, which ultimately led to our modern economy, right? This is how these things started. Okay. Then in the 1800s, we innovated the internal combustion engine. And that's a beautiful thing because now we're talking horsepower now. Now we're talking mechanized horsepower, the capacity to really churn energy, really churn power to do any number of things, to produce the industrial revolution. But to fuel this internal combustion engine, we start using something called fossil fuels, right? Coal, oil, natural gas. Now, it's important to note that in the nearly 10,000 years that preceded this and the hundreds of thousands and millions of years that preceded this, civilization had not used fossil fuels. So this was a new find that we could use this dark stuff, right, to burn and it creates energy. But the problem with the fossil fuels are when you burn them to use as energy, they release what's called greenhouse. We call them greenhouse gases. This is what scientists call them, greenhouse gases. And why? It's basic chemistry. We're not getting into the geeky stuff. Okay, I promise. But what makes coal and natural gas and oil a fossil fuel is the exhaust. When you burn those fuels, they release carbon and methane and gases that float up into the atmosphere. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with the floating up in the atmosphere. It's a big atmosphere. But they stay there. And depending on which type, they stay a long time. Carbon can stay 400 years. Methane, which is much more powerful, only stays about 50 to 70 years. Okay. But still, that's plenty of time in the atmosphere. And what they do is, and what creates our temperature on the planet is when the sunlight comes through our atmosphere, it comes in, it bounces off the surface of the earth, and it goes straight back out. And the time that it's within our atmosphere is what creates the temperature. Okay? So these fossil fuels, these greenhouse gases that are burned when we use the fossil fuels, release, they leave this gas in the atmosphere. And when the sunlight bounces off the surface of the earth and is supposed to just go straight through, they absorb the sunlight. They absorb the sunlight like insulation in our homes. Okay. But hey, this is a big planet. That's a big sky. That atmosphere is huge. Okay. So around 1850, we started using fossil fuels in a major way to power the Industrial Revolution. And then the modern economy was off to the races. Okay. By, by, okay, so I told you, we had been at 57 degrees Fahrenheit for 10,000 years and never exceeded 2 degrees up, 59 degrees Fahrenheit, or 2 degrees down, right? 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Well, by the 1980s, we were fast approaching, we were fast approaching 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Why? Well, we'll get to that. Okay. And that's when Hurricane Andrew occurred. Hurricane Andrew. People in the southeastern United States know people who remember Hurricane Andrew, which at that time, in the late 80s, was the worst natural disaster in U.S. history. All right. Okay, here we go. All right. Now, slowly but surely, over the next 32 years, 30 something years to 2020, we have Hurricane Katrina, right? Which completely dwarfed Hurricane Andrew. We have Hurricane Ian. We have Hurricane Sandy, whose rain off the side of that hurricane flooded sections of the New York subway system. I mean, devastating. Okay. What had happened between the 1980s as the global average surface temperature was approaching 59 degrees is that we had a proliferation of extreme weather events. Okay. Because as the temperature started approaching the higher end of the normal band that it had been for 10,000 years, right? The predictable weather started changing. And now the weather started getting severe. And the intensity of these hurricanes, of these extreme weather events, became stronger and stronger. Okay, right. And what else is because temperatures are changing in different areas, all of a sudden you have tornadoes moving to different areas. You have hurricanes going up to New York, right, where they don't normally happen. You have tropical storms off the coast of California. Yes. Okay. A tropical storm is the precursor to a hurricane. And we haven't had a hurricane off California. Why? Because the Pacific Ocean, the Gulf Coast, it comes from Alaska. The Gulf Stream comes from Alaska. The water is too cold. It ain't 100 degrees in Miami, right? It, it's too cold. Well, it's warming up. And we had our first last summer, 2024, we had our first tropical storms off the coast of California, which means hurricanes are coming to California. How about that? If earthquakes are not enough, severe forest fires are not enough, now we're going to also have hurricanes. Oh, and tsunamis are coming too. Okay, so here we go. So by 2020, the global average surface temperature exceeded the increase of 2 degrees Fahrenheit for the first time in over 10,000 years. Okay. And the impact is what I've said. Extreme weather events defined by events that caused more than $1 billion in damage had tripled since the 1980s. And I can tell you this much, they're only accelerating since 2020, now that we're in 2025. Okay. So, but it gets a little worse before it gets a little better. And why? Because we're finding that the warming is accelerating. Okay. So it took us 170 years, 1850 to 2020, to increase a little bit more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. But we're tracking this stuff, and we've been tracking this stuff since the 80s. Okay. So we have models that, based on a variety of factors that are driving this warming, all the climate models indicate that within the next 20 years, and quite frankly, we're on pace to within the next 10 years, we're going to increase another full degree Fahrenheit. Okay. What does that mean? So 170 years to get 2 degrees and less than 20 years to get 1 degree. We are accelerating. And the reason why we're accelerating is something called positive feedback loops. Okay. So what's warming the planet is the accumulation of those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are absorbing the sunlight as it bounces off the surface and holding it in the atmosphere. And that's warming the planet. Okay. But as the planet is getting warmer, you have the polar ice caps are melting. And the impact of the melting is they used to just repel sunlight straight back up through the atmosphere. Because they're melting, they're absorbing the sunlight now. They're reflecting less up in the atmosphere. More sunlight is staying here. That's an acceleration of the warming, a contributor to the warming. Another contributor to the warming is the oceans are massive carbon sinks. So all these greenhouse gases that we've been admitted that have produced carbon, right? the ocean absorbs. So they don't all just go to the atmosphere. A lot of it goes into the ocean. A lot of it goes into the tropical rainforests. A lot of it goes in all types of plants and bushes and stuff like that. Right? Okay. Well, we're saturating the ocean with carbon. And so the ocean's absorption rate is declining, which means more of the carbon that we are emitting when we use oil, natural gas, and coal is going into the atmosphere. This is causing the acceleration. The tropical rainforests, we're cutting them down for wood and all types of development reasons. This is converting them into savanna, which means when the rainforest characteristics get past a tipping point, they will stop being rainforests. And rainforests, because of how they're constructed, are a massive carbon sink. They absorb carbon and bury it. Right. Well, what's happening as we cut it down and the ecology of the rainforest is changing, you pass a tipping point and it no longer absorbs the carbon. It moves towards becoming a savanna. And that means it releases all that carbon that it's been holding on to for generations, for thousands of years, now gets released. That too is an accelerator. So these are the reasons why it's no longer just the greenhouse gas emissions that we are using when we use fossil fuels. It is these other positive feedbacks that are contributing to the rate of the warming. And so where you can get that surface temperature up to 62 degrees, 63 degrees, which means ice age time, right? 120 degrees today could be 180 degrees, could be 200 degrees in places. We're going to have areas on the colder side, the same thing. 80 degrees below today, in Saskatchewan could be 120 degrees below or 150 degrees below. We're going to have areas of the earth become uninhabitable by humans if this global average surface temperature continues to escalate at the rate it's going. But, and here's the definitive source document, because we hear, and I know you've heard a lot of noise from a lot of sources saying this and that, it's real, it's not real, whatever. Okay, I'm going to give you the signal that should eliminate all this noise. Okay? Now you use your sense making skills in what I'm about to say. There is an organization in the United Nations. Yeah. I know. It's shaky record, but it's made of not for profit scientists. In America, those are the scientists from NOAA. Those are the scientists from the Department of Energy. Okay. All right. There's an organization called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. When they were formed in the 1980s, when they started realizing we got a problem with this climate and these fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions. So they start tracking it. And every 7 years, they do a massive global research analysis of all the latest research relating to human-induced climate change. How are we causing this problem? What are we doing that's causing this problem? Okay. Then they would produce that report, and then they would produce a report for how can we adapt to these changes. Very important. And then they would produce a third report. How can we minimize how much the weather is going to change? Mitigation. Okay. These are three important reports, and they do them every 7 years. Well, in 2021, 2022, and 2023, they released the sixth assessment. So do your math. 7 times 6, 42 years they've been at this. Okay. And in the most recent assessment, each one of those reports are like 2,000 pages long. Because like I said, it is deep analysis of every of the latest research on these subjects globe wide. Okay. And these are the global scientists. So they know no one's reading them damn 6,000 pages. They know that. Right. So what they do for us, amazing thing. And I'm putting it in attached to this podcast so that you could get your copy. They produce 4 summary documents called the Summary for Policymakers because they know the politicians are not going to read them either, the 6,000 pages. And in the Summary for Policymakers, there is one for human-induced climate change, the science basis for human-induced climate change, one for climate adaptation, how can we adapt to the changes that are occurring, and one for climate mitigation, how can we minimize, how can we slow down this warming so we don't have 200-degree temperatures somewhere on the planet, right? Okay, all right. So they produce a summary for policymakers for each one of those 3, and they're about between 30 and 40 pages long. And then, in case those 3 reports are just too much for us to read, they produce what's called a synthesis report, a 40-page report that synthesizes the 3 summary for policymaker reports. So that's what I'm going to attach for you. It's 40 pages, 42 pages, excuse me. And it's the 2023 synthesis report, summary for policymakers. And I'm telling you, this report is what's driving global climate regulations, climate legislation. You could check the executive summary for the Inflation Reduction Act, and you see how they pull in data right from this report. We can go through that sometime, but not here because we're not geeking out. My point being is that it is that important. The significance and why this is the signal, why this you can disregard all the noise you hear from all these different sources who think they have 12 alphabets behind their name and they're telling you something that's only confusing you, confusing me too, right? Why is all 195 nations are members of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. And these are the leading not-for-profit scientists. And oh, by the way, let's take that moment for a second to differentiate for-profit science, which is destroying us as we speak. For-profit science is not science like we think it's science. Follow the facts where they go. No. For-profit science is bending science for the benefit of someone's business model. Okay. And if you don't believe that, just take note of how the tobacco scientists in the 60s had proven that cigarette smoking causes cancer, and they didn't admit it. And they just got exposed when the Brown and Williamson reports were leaked on the internet in the 90s. And all the attorneys were like, time to get these tobacco industry people. And Senator McCain cut the deal with Bill Clinton and for a $20 billion settlement for the tobacco industry after how many of us they killed? Right. Okay. That's for-profit science. You want some more for-profit science? I'm touching this third wheel right now. Take the COVID vaccine. Now, I'm not going to say anything about whether it works or not or anything. No, that's not my point. My point is RMNA technology is the theory underlying how the vaccines work. And you and I paid for that. We paid for that research. But somehow, for-profit pharmaceuticals got to use our general research that developed the theory, which mirrors how our immune systems work, by the way. And they designed proprietary vaccines that they had the temerity in a global pandemic. This again, they used our research, right, to sell back to us at $20 a pop. Oh, we paid for it. We paid for it. Yeah, that $38 trillion in debt, we paid for it, right? Okay. And they, Pfizer, all the Moderna, look at their profits. You know, it used to be war profiteering, pandemic profiteering would be treason. Not with these mothers. No. Okay, so that's for-profit science. This is not them. This is not for-profit science. This is the science. This is like Jonas Salk, who did the polio vaccine. And when they asked him, why didn't you patent the polio vaccine? He said, it would be like patenting the sunshine. because you know what? He was trying to help people. Isn't that quaint? Not with these people. Right? That's for profit science. Real science, the science that we trust and believe in, is the not for profit folks who are not trying to make some money. They're just trying to figure out what's true about the world, about us, about about physics and about biology and about chemistry. Okay. Well, the leading not for profit scientists from 195 member nations. Now, let's be clear about something. There's only 193 member nations to the United Nations. So every one of the nations in the United Nations is in the IPCC, and two additional nations who have not yet been admitted to the United Nations. All of them are in the IPCC. And oh, by the way, this 40-page document I'm talking about, yeah, the unanimous agreement of all 195 nations, their leading scientists. Now, again, I'm asking you to test your sense making. Think of anything else, any topic, okay, that's of controversy, like climate, like whether we created the climate, in which Russia, the United States, the European Union, the Ukrainians, the Israelis, the Saudis, the Iranians, all 53 nations in Africa, right? Yeah, yeah. All these nations unanimously agree with everything in that 40-page document, with everything in each of those summary for policymaker documents. So if you want to know the truth about what the globe thinks about climate and why and what the science is that backs it up, this is where you go. Do not listen to any of these bullshit artists who think they are smarter than the scientists of all these nations combined, who don't agree on anything else. Okay? There's no subject of controversy in this world that all 195 nations agree on. So let's not get it twisted. Right? This is where you find out the truth. Don't listen to CNBC. Don't listen to any of those vested interests. Don't listen to the left or the right or this and that. Certainly don't listen to any politician. Right? This is the source. You check it out and you see what I'm talking about. And then you go, and I'll show you where to go from major federal legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, which announced through the Department of Energy the goal of the Inflation Reduction Act was to provide matching funds to transition the U.S. economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce them by 40%. Well, you can go to like page 16 of the summary for policymakers that says we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 by 43%. Okay? That's how powerful this document is. So arm yourself with the truth. Okay? And that's the document that I'm relying on. The one for science basis for human-induced climate change is what I've been relying on in telling this story. Okay. All right. So this is your source. And according to the 2023 synthesis report, summary for policymakers, I will attach it, right? We have the technology to slow the warming to where it will not get to a point that it causes irreversible, catastrophic damage. We have the technology. The question is whether we will do it. Because what the report says, we got 10 years. This is it. The next 10 years will decide what happens for a millennia. That's the significance of this, of the urgency of the moment. Now, it really didn't have to be this severe. And I've already covered in episode 3 when I covered the Clinton administration and I talked about how they blew up the Kyoto Protocol in 1999 and how we haven't made progress because of what they did. Okay. But here is where we are. That's spilt milk. by now. We still have 10 years that we can make a difference, right? So that's why we need to have these difficult conversations to talk about what can be done. And what needs to be done is we need to rapidly reduce our use of fossil fuels to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 43% by 2030. And it's already 2025. There's a lot of work being done on it. But you and I are not really fully plugged in. And why? Because we've been told a lot of nonsense that it's not true or that it is true, that it's the Democrats' idea versus the that's crazy. The earth could care less about ideology. It's chemistry, okay? You know how your insulation works in your house? That will warm your house no matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Yeah, welcome to the party. This is science, okay? Do not let these people politicize something that the earth could care less about, okay? That's not changing anything, okay? And so we have to change it. We have to make these politicians hear us because it is affecting our lives. Right. You don't know how? If you haven't noticed the various extreme weather events, the fact that forest fires are a thing, I mean a real thing. We've always had them to some extent, not like this extent in many regions of the country. There was and Tornado Alley, yeah, you know, people used to chase the tornadoes. You knew where to go. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, you have some tornado in December 2023 reaching all the way over into Kentucky somewhere, destroying destroying an Amazon warehouse with a tornado that you only get usually only get in August because of the temperature conditions. In December, 100 miles at least east of Tornado Alley. So all I'm saying is these events are happening. Talk to a farmer about their crop yields because the way it's affecting crop yields is they're getting too much rain and they're getting drought. It's extreme on both sides. You know, the farmer needs a certain amount of rain, but they don't need too much. That kills the crops. But they need a certain amount of rain. So drought that kills the crops. This is crop yields. You like wine? Talk to the vineyard. They're having it's affecting their yields. Okay, so on and on and on. Evidence around. If you live in the Gulf Coast, I mean, damn. And you, if it's possible, and if you own a house, just there's a reason why your insurance policy is blowing up. Right? Right? If you don't think climate is real, call your insurance agent. Ask them what's going on with my homeowner's insurance. Right. Okay. Welcome. That is, they can't fool around with the politics. The underwriters and the actuaries could give to over 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 what this one said and what that one said, and this is his policy. We're tearing that shit down. No, no. What they care about is actual risk and covering actual risk. And oh, by the way, it's getting so crazy that they can't cover it. So in some states like California, along the Gulf Coast, and certainly in the state of Florida, they're abandoning homeowners. Why? They can't charge enough to cover the magnitude of the risk. And we are just getting started. We're still at 59 degrees. What happens when we're at 60 degrees? I'm just saying. You think it's trivial? It ain't trivial. We've seen evidence all over the place. So it's time for us to wake up before the extreme weather event is in our living room, right? I mean, because it is in every aspect. There are places running out of water. Go to Salt Lake. Check out the Colorado River system because the states that draw from that river are taking a massive shave from how much? And that's California, Arizona, New Mexico. Yeah, they're taking a shave. Why? Because the river is getting low, because the weather events are breaking the water cycle. Yeah, we're going to run out of fresh water. How about that? Try to drink the ocean. No, it don't work. Just, okay, so let's get past the denialism. Let's get past not in my backyard yet. I'm telling you, you do not want to see the Mack truck when it's in your backyard. That's not the time to notice. You want to see that like way down the road, so you can make sure you're good and far away from that thing when it comes rumbling through. What this is what climate change is. Okay, so we need to wake up on this. Okay, okay. So that's climate change. Those are the solutions we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 43% by 2030, which means we need to be more energy efficient with the use of fossil fuels. We need to transition to renewable energy where we can. There is lots of ways the utility companies are involved. You could subscribe to a community solar plan and get charged lower cost energy based on the cost of solar, right? Call your utility company. You would be surprised. They're trying to transition too, right? There are things you can do, right? But one is to find ways to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, your use of fossil fuels. That's heat pumps and all those type of things in the house. It will lower your bills anyway. Good time for it, right? Okay. But there's also nature-based solutions that we as societies and people can engage in, because nature loves to absorb carbon, loves that thing. I mean, we exhale carbon dioxide, and guess what? The trees inhale carbon. They love that. To, to a tree, carbon is our oxygen. And the joy about it is they take our carbon and they exhale oxygen. So now we can breathe. It's a beautiful thing. Plant some trees, expand the capacity for nature to clean up this problem that we caused. Yes, we can do that. These are nature-based solutions, right? And there are many of them out there that will allow nature to absorb the carbon. Right? Again, resuscitate the ocean and things like that. Okay, so there are solutions. They are all in the summary for policymakers mitigation. Okay, the other problem. So that's the climate problem, the climate crisis problem, and how we contributed to it with the use of fossil fuels that we only innovated in 1850, and how it has accelerated planetary ecological change that usually takes thousands and thousands of years. In 170 years, we did what it hasn't been done in 10,000 years. And so now we're no longer in the Holocene. Yeah. They came up with a name. They came up with a name, and I'm trying to remember it right now. We are in the it's the period of time, it's the epoch where human activity is driving ecological change. We are driving change based on our use of natural resources and based on our use of fossil fuels. We are accelerating planetary ecological change, and the impact on current life on Earth. Well, you describe it. Since 1970, 70% of all species on this planet have gone extinct. To me, that sounds like catastrophic. And guess what? Humans can't survive without some critters. We got critters in our gut helping us digest. I mean, I'm just saying, we can't survive without bees. We need that pollination to eat. I mean, just saying. Okay, so it's important that we're killing all these species, because eventually the species we need to be here for us to live are not going to be there, and then we're next. I'm just saying, this is the impact we're talking about. Okay, back to the next thing: natural resource overshoot. Yeah, we got 8.5 billion people, sure, and half of them hardly touch the natural resources of this planet. Most of the natural resources that are consumed are by us in the developed world, in these mature economies. Yeah, China is trying to catch up, but of their 1.4 billion people, um, about a billion of them are living in the 1950s. Yeah, yeah, they're trying to catch up, but they ain't there yet. Who's been driving this train for the last 30 years, using most of the resources? Is the United States, is Canada, is Europe, is the UK. Yeah, yeah. These industrial, these mature industrial, modern, developed nations. We are the highest consumers of these natural resources. The emerging markets, India and China and Brazil, they're using a lot now to try to catch up. But historically, it's us. Okay. But the bottom line is China, billion people living in the 1950s. India, maybe 900 million living in the 1950s. Brazil, maybe 500 million living in the 1950s. All of these nations are trying to bring their populations up to modern living standards, something that we did in the United States in the 1950s. That's how we got all the way out there in rural America, and they joined the 21st century. Okay. Well, all these developing nations are trying to do the same thing, and their people deserve it. The problem is we already are drawing more natural resource than the planet can replenish in a year. And so there's another metric that I'm going to share with you. It's called Global Overshoot Day. What the hell is that? Okay. Come up with it now. Scientists do. They're in the basement. They got to have some fun. Global Overshoot Day. It is the day in which we use a year's worth of natural resources based on how much the earth can replenish in a year. So the last metric date that I knew is 2023. I'm not sure if 2024 has been announced yet. But the 2023 Global or Earth Overshoot Day, whichever way you want to go, is let me look this up. Let me make sure we get this right. So that okay. So where's our global? Okay, Earth Overshoot Day, 2023 is August 2nd, 2023. So that means by August 2nd, we use the globe uses the Earth. All the modern economies use a full year's natural resource. And so for every day after that, during 2023, we are drawing down the available natural resources for future generations. Okay. And remember I mentioned that when we invented the internal combustion engine, that modern human civilization hadn't used fossil fuels before then. Okay. We had no reason to use it. We didn't know what it was. We didn't have technologies or whatever. So this resource had built up for millions of years. Yeah. There's a gentleman called Nate Higgins, and he has a podcast called The Great Simplification. And one of the great contributions to humanity that he provides is he talks about something called the carbon pulse. And what he's talking about is a reality that we are about to face. Okay. So in the 175 years since we started using fossil fuels to fuel the modern economy, right? We are burning through millions of years of oil, natural gas, and coal. And we are facing a cliff where we are going to run out. It's not going to happen in 2030, but we're talking about within a lifetime that this is at risk. And, there's no absolutes on these things. Best estimates, we are running out and it's going to be rapid decline. And so Nate is advocating for the great simplification and how we transition, you know, to consume less. But okay, and I'm a big fan. Nate, you're great. Okay, check Nate Higgins. He's on YouTube. Okay, and so I mentioned that. Okay, well that's what the natural resource overshoot is all about. When you use more than the earth can replenish in a year, what is left is getting less and less and less, right? So we're drawing down on future generations. That's what we're doing. And so, based on the Earth Overshoot Day 2023 of August 2nd, we use 1.7 Earths a year based on that overshoot day. Guess what the United States Overshoot Day is? Now, if every country on the planet consumed like the United States, the overshoot day would be March 14th, 2024. The United States 2024 overshoot day is March 14th. 4.9 Earths. Yeah, that's how gluttonous we are. Just what word would you use? Okay. 4.9 Earths. Okay. Yeah, and everyone wants to be like us. Could you imagine? Okay. So, what to do about that? We can't continue. It's not sustainable to continue to do things like that. Well, there's a series of problems. Okay. The first problem is economics. So, we've operated with capitalism for about 275 years, and it built the modern economy. I mean, so many positives is hard. The acceleration of innovation, it's just amazing. Right. So certainly, yes, better than mercantilism, but yeah, agrarian economies. Yeah, but yeah, sure, it's better than the antiquities. It shows a progression. But the way that capitalism works, the only way that it functions, is it requires perpetual growth. Now, when capitalism became a thing in the 1700s, economists back then understood that this is a problem. Why? Well, because even if humanity in the 1700s, when the economists first recognized this as a problem, were only using a snippet of the natural resources of the planet because of their technology and population and this and that, right? They understood that the planet is a finite resource planet. It can only replenish at a certain rate. And so that depending on how quickly we started accelerating our consumption through due to technology and everything else, eventually we were going to hit the wall. We were going to hit the carrying capacity of the planet. We are there and beyond. Okay. So, so the problem with our economics, don't hate the player, hate the game. The problem with our economics is that we cannot continue to grow. So therefore, we need an economics that actually works at equilibrium, at the steady state. You can have. I know it is mind-boggling, but the fact that capitalism, the way it's working, does not work at stabilization. It either grows or it contracts, and we don't want it to contract. That's when everyone's losing jobs and people are jumping out of windows. No, so we need a different economic system. And let's dispense with the binary drama, the binary mythology, that anytime you talk about capitalism, that means you must be a socialist. Socialist. Really, we have innovated everything else. We are not capable. We innovated capitalism. Right? Okay. We're not stuck between capitalism or socialism. We can actually innovate a new economics based on what we learned in capitalism, based on what we learned in socialism, based on what we learned in feudalism, based on what we learned in mercantilism, based on the accumulation of human knowledge. We can innovate a new economics of the 21st century that allows us to prosper within the planetary resource boundaries of the earth. Because guess what? We don't have a choice. We're just going to run out. How about that? And have mass deaths as resources start collapsing. And that contraction of 8.5 billion people. Could you imagine? No. No. We can do better. We can innovate a methodology of economics that sustains at the steady state within the planetary boundaries, that does not have us living in caves. That's not the choice. No. We can use our technology, we can use our innovation, we can use AI, we can use automation, we can use all these things to get more out of less. Yeah. Okay. People are working on it. I'm just going to name two, but there's many people working on it. There is a just a brilliant ecological economist that I love named Tim Jackson. And he's up no. To be fair, Tim is a protege of other giants. Okay, and that's fine. And I don't mean any disrespect to them. But I'm referencing Tim. He wrote Prosperity Without Growth. Check this thing out. Right. He is grappling with an economics that can function without growth. And it I believe based on my gleaning, it has something to do with a movement towards um, the service economy and how we value that. But these a lot of smart people need to work on this to devise this. But it is what I'm saying here is for 20 years, Tim has been working at it. There's another brilliant economist, Wall Street banker type, recovering. But I love him. John Fulton, who's developing regenerative economics. And it's based on this theory that, hey, kind of borrowing a page from biomimicry, tip my hat to that, which is a concept of mirroring how nature does things. Because nature got a lot figured out that humanity can copy, right? Okay, well, John Fulton's idea, brilliant, and he's brilliant, is why don't we look at what sustaining living systems do to sustain and base our economics based on that? Because what we need is a sustaining economics. We need an economics that allows us to live within our planetary boundaries. So why don't we look to the rule to the things that we can discern about how nature works, how living systems that have survived millions of years function. What are the rules that govern them, that allow them to live within their boundaries and sustain open-endedly? Because we need an economics that would allow us to do that. What a brilliant idea. Okay, so that's John Fulton. So those are two people, two giants, in my opinion. But there are many others who are both critics and are invested in real solutions. Brilliant people. Okay. So we're working on the problem of the economics. But we have a role that we could play now. And that is we can get more energy. We not only energy efficient, we're resource efficient. Okay. One of the major solutions to the climate crisis is in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is to move our production processes to a circular economy process because a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions comes from mining the natural resource and it comes from disposing of the end product once it's no longer serviceable, whatever the good or service is, right? No, when it's no longer serviceable, we put it in landfills, we put it all over the place, and that emits a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So between that and extracting. So instead of having that type of system, which is what we currently have, get the natural resources out of the earth, build the product, put it in the landfill. Okay. Have a circular process where you design a product using materials that can all be recycled. You design the product to last as long as it can last. You design the product to be repairable. So it will break down and that's fine, but it has replacement parts and it can be repairable. Again, you're delaying it turning into garbage for the landfill. And then when it can no longer be repaired, right, you take what is left. And because it's completely recyclable, you put it back in the system so it doesn't head to the landfill. Yeah, this is something businesses can do. This is something we as consumers can support, can demand of businesses. There are major businesses who are moving to this model. An example of a massive retailer who's getting their supply chain to do this is IKEA. Tip my hat to them. And there are others, too many to name. My point being, there's a movement that both contributes to the climate crisis, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and reduces our, our use of natural resources by creating cyclical production processes where we need to draw less natural resources because we're recycling the ones that we've already drawn. Okay. All right. And then there's a final major thing that we need to seriously get real about. As I told you, the United States Overshoot Day is March 14th, 2024. So we are just blowing through natural resources. We need to stop. We need to recognize that all the stuff that's in our garage that is still in the new packages, we need to stop that. We need to really make the choice to consume less. And why? If you care for your children's children, right? You need to start thinking about this because we each are contributing to that. If we buy less, oh, we have more money, right? For other things, right? If we buy less. I'm just talking about taking some of the cream off the crop. Take a look at how many shoes you got in your closet. How many cars do we really need? I mean, who's driving these cars? You know, we could share. It's not the word. I know, my God. We used to share all the time as kids, right? Now we're doing all this adulting, and we got to have my own. Who's mature? The kids? They seem pretty mature because they are sharing. If we shared and used and didn't have stuff just sitting around waiting for us to use 2 weeks down the road when we actually use it, but don't you touch it, we need to be mature about the use of our resources. So, yeah, walk around your house, look at your stuff, ask yourself when we're using 4 times, almost 5 times the amount of Earth's production, right? Do I really need all this stuff? Do I need to continue to buy all this stuff? Can't I do something more constructive with my time than that? I'm looking at myself in the mirror too. Do I need that printer back there? Oh, it's over there. Probably not. This is what I'm saying. So consider that because there's a movement called, yeah, it might as well be a 4-letter word. It's called degrowth. But it is an invitation to wealthy nations like America to look in the mirror and say, hey, we have so much excess resource that we consume because we can, when most of the planet does not have enough to even make a dent. Now, we don't have to give that to them. We could stop consuming as much as we're consuming. I mean, seriously, how happy is this making us? I don't need to recall or recount the references that show that we get hardly any additional happiness beyond a certain level of income. So take note of that because this is the moment we need each of us to realize that we could be extremely happy on far less. And that does not put us back into the 1800s living like Abraham Lincoln in some cold shed. No, we could still be in a nice house. with a nice car that's EV. You know, they got some banging trucks. Come on now. I'm just saying. So consider that because degrowth is a way for us to transition us wealthy nations who are consuming most of the global resources as it is and give some room for 4 billion people in the global south to actually move into the 21st century. They do need to increase their consumption. They're not the consumption problem. It's us. And that's just the truth. This is why we need to have difficult conversations now because we can solve this problem, but we need to start participating. We need to take our personal responsibility. We need to look in the mirror and be able to be proud of the person we see because we know we're doing what we can do. And there you have it. So, what is the breadcrumb for this episode 7? Why the climate crisis is real? The breadcrumb is that it's real because you have a 40-page, 42-page document that all 195 member nations, they're leading not-for-profit scientists who are not getting paid bank to make some money for somebody, unanimously agree that we caused this problem and they have practical ways for us to solve this problem, but we have to solve it. We have to get on it in 10 years or it really becomes too late. So that's your breadcrumb. The house is on fire, but we have plenty of time to restore the house before it burns down. Well, that was the elephant in the room. It was a conversation that needed to have. I hope you learned something from it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you look at the references I'm going to attach to this episode so that you know and you can look and you can judge for yourself. Because this is Breadcrumbs. Podcasts for people who know it's not working. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. This wasn't an easy topic, but it was an important one. And I will see you in the conversation. Take care. If I can turn on, yeah.